Here are two houses available on the market right now in Da Nang, Vietnam. Both are located on the north side of the city in a district called Tan Khe, which is not a luxury district. It is a ordinary, decent, middle-of-the-road neighborhood. Both of these homes are 3 floors, 3 bedrooms, and both located in an alley, fully furnished, and only a single kilometer apart. The first of these houses is for sale at a price of 4.6 billion dong. The second house is for rent at a price of 14 million dong. That's about $540. Now, some of you may already have noticed something strange about that pricing, because how can two homes which are almost identical and are located in the very same neighborhood be priced so differently? How can one of them be worth the equivalent of $176,000, yet the other one can be rented for the equivalent of $540 a month? If this was really the case, why would anyone ever bother buying when you can just keep on renting cheaply forever? In this video, we will be exploring exactly that phenomenon, on how Vietnamese homes can be so expensive yet so affordable at the same time, especially considering what you are getting. But first, if you're interested in the economics and culture of life across Southeast Asia, go ahead and subscribe for me, because you'll be getting a whole lot more of that from me. Let's start things off by doing some quick math on the two houses that we just discussed, because it gets much worse than it actually looks, even just at a first glance. For context, the average worker in Vietnam earns 9 million dong a month. So if you earned the average wage and you spent absolutely nothing at all, nothing on rent, no food, nothing, it would still take you about 43 years to buy that home outright. And renting one at 14 million dong a month, it would take nearly 28 years to add up to the purchase price. That means 28 years of somewhere to live without having to worry about maintenance, without property fees, with none of the stress of ownership, and with the freedom to leave whenever you want. There is a rough rule in property ownership for this. If a house costs less than 15 years of its own rent, you should buy it if you can. If it costs more than 20, just keep renting. The average figure in the United States sits right inside that band. Vietnam averages closer to 30 years. So this is a country where the average wage is about $340 a month. Yet property prices here are equivalent to that of a far wealthier country, which is the opposite of what you would expect. More affordable countries are supposed to have cheap assets and better returns, yet none of that is happening here. Cushman & Wakefield, one of the largest international property firms, ran the numbers on Vietnam this year. At current prices, a typical Vietnamese household with 2 incomes would need somewhere between 50 and 85 years of savings to buy a home. And on the standard international measure, price divided by household income, Vietnam now sits around 10th in the world. This is higher than Thailand, higher than China, and even higher than Singapore. In fact, it's roughly level with Hong Kong, which is routinely ranked as the least affordable major housing market on the entire planet. And even if you did decide to purchase property here and rent it out, you would in fact still be earning less money than if you had just taken that same money and plopped it into a Vietnamese bank and just earned interest. A 12-month deposit on any of the 4 big state-owned banks pays 5.9%. At ACB, one of the larger private banks, it is 7.8%. Renting out an apartment in Hanoi returns about 3.5%, and that is before tax, before management fees, and before maintenance and upkeep. And leaving your money inside of the bank does not require you to find a tenant, nor does it need repainting, and it does not have the possibility of springing an expensive leak in its roof. This was not always the case either. 10 years ago, rental yields in Vietnam were 8 to 10%. Rents have gone up since then. Purchase prices have just gone up a great deal more. So on paper, nobody should be buying, yet everybody still continues to buy more and more, which means that one of two things is true. Either everyone in the entire country is making a huge mistake, or the thing that's being bought here is not the same thing that I have been describing. Real quick before we get into it though, have you ever considered purchasing property in Southeast Asia only to look into the actual details of it and then find yourself quietly and quickly backing away? Let me know down in the comments below. Look at the shape of the average Vietnamese home. 3.5 meters at the front, about 18 meters deep, and up to 5 floors stacked on top of each other. Vietnamese people call them na ong, tube houses. If you have ever been to Amsterdam, this might look oddly familiar. Narrow at the front, deep, tall, packed shoulder to shoulder. And in both cities, you will hear the exact same explanation for it, an old tax on how much street frontage your house took up. So people built narrow to pay less. It is a tidy story and it does not hold up. In Amsterdam, the plots along the canals were sold narrow from the very beginning, deliberately, so that more houses could front the water. And the frontage taxes only arrived once those houses were already standing. Vietnamese houses ended up narrow under the same pressure, more houses reaching the street rather than the water. Because frontage was such a scarce thing and it came at an absolute premium, and once the strip that's touching the actual street becomes the expensive part, you buy as little of it as you can afford. And you decide to build backwards and upwards instead, where space is much easier to come by. And that is not just history. It is now written into the rules. Current building regulations in Ho Chi Minh City say a residential plot in a central area cannot be smaller than 36 square meters and cannot be narrower than 3 meters at the front. That is a planning rule about the smallest plot you can legally create. Nothing to do with tax, but the effect is the same. There is a legal minimum, and of course people will build to the exact minimum, which really matters because that narrow strip that meets the front of the street is actually the most important part of a Vietnamese house. The ground floor is very often a business, a coffee shop, somewhere selling pho, a mini mart, a motorbike repair, a nail salon. Most often the family runs it themselves while living upstairs, or they rent that ground floor out to somebody who does. And if the family owns the building, they pay rent on nothing, not on the home and not on the shop. The floors above are built to be a home and to stay one. There will often be a family altar, and it may well be where the grandparents live. Houses like these are built to be inherited and to last a family generations. And if another generation needs space, another floor goes on the top. So here is the actual answer to the question we started off with. Both of these houses are practically identical. The difference was never that one owner simply decided to rent while the other decided to sell. It is that renting and owning a home is a completely different thing, especially here. A tenant is paying for one thing only, and that is to use the building as a home, month by month. An owner is paying for the land underneath it, as well as the ability to open a business on the strip that touches the street. Also, the right to add yet another floor if a child gets married. The very thing the family will inherit, and the place to keep money for the next 30 years. The rental price for one of these properties can only ever be priced for the ability to live there. The purchase price, however, carries the cost of all 5 other options, which does explain the gap, but it also opens a much harder question. If a house here is worth 43 years of the average salary, how does an ordinary Vietnamese family actually get a hold of one? Well, mostly they do not borrow from the bank. In fact, Vietnamese government auditors estimate that households in the country actually hold a total of over 400 tons of gold, not in bank vaults, but in people's homes. And there is a practice here that I find genuinely remarkable. When a family builds a home, they will often borrow gold from relatives, not cash, physical gold, in small bars a little over an ounce each. And the loan is repaid in gold too, which means the loan has no interest rate of its own. It just tracks whatever gold does. The French news agency AFP found a man outside Hanoi who borrowed 4 bars in 2022 to start building. All 4 together were worth about $10,000 then. He still owes 4 bars, and gold has roughly doubled since. So without ever missing a payment and without any bank being involved, his debt is now worth twice of what he borrowed. So borrowing from friends and family over here is by no means just a little favor. It is a real debt, and it grows, all without a bank being attached to the process at any point. This is also why you will hear that most property here is bought in cash. It is cash by the time it reaches the seller, but behind a lot of that cash is family gold somebody sold or savings pooled across 3 generations. You can actually see this right on the skyline here in Da Nang. Look at almost any rooftop in Vietnam and you will see steel rods sticking straight out of the concrete, going nowhere. That is not an abandoned building site. Houses here go up 1 floor at a time as the money for the next floor arrives. So the steel is left out deliberately for whenever that is. A house built on family cash does not have a completion date because nobody is waiting on it. And that changes what the whole market is capable of doing, because if almost nobody owes a bank anything, something very strange becomes possible. In most countries, when property demand falls, prices fall with it. Not because owners want to sell cheaply, but because some of them have no choice. There is a bank on the other end of the loan, and when people lose jobs or rates rise, houses get sold whether the owner likes it or not. Enough forced sales and the prices come down for everyone. That is not how it works here. CBRE, the world's largest commercial property firm, reports that even among Vietnamese buyers who do use a bank, most of them keep the loan relatively small, often under 40% of the purchase price. A deposit of 60% or more is normal here. So take the bank out of it and the whole mechanism disappears. Nobody is ringing up anybody, which means when demand falls in Vietnam, sales stop. But the prices simply do not, which is exactly what is happening right now. Transactions this year are down 8% on last year, and purchase prices are still going up. Anywhere in the world that runs on mortgages, that combination ends in a property crash within a few years. Here it can sit like that comfortably for a decade. Which leaves one final question, and it's actually the most important one. Fine, nobody has to sell, but if rental returns are simply that bad, why does nobody want to? Why not sell the house, take the money, put it in the bank at nearly 8%, and simply just go and rent the home down the road for $500 a month? If banks here pay out interest that's way higher than what you would earn by renting out your own place, that seems like a pretty easy decision to make. But Vietnamese deposit insurance only covers 350 million dong per person per bank. That is about 13,000 US dollars. And it only went up to that level in July this year. Before that, it was 125 million. So say you actually did sell your house at 4.6 billion dong and put that right into the bank. Only about 7% of it would actually be insured and protected. The rest of it would depend on how a bank failure would be handled should that ever happen. And one did, in fact, recently happen. In 2022, Vietnam went through one of the largest bank frauds in its history at Saigon Commercial Bank. So the confidence really isn't there right now, and the alternatives are not looking much better. The stock market is small and it has burned people badly and recently. Getting money out of the country is not a straightforward process, and gold was the traditional answer. But gold has started becoming taxable on transfer as of this year as well. And then there is the part that makes actually holding the house almost free. There is no annual property tax on your home in Vietnam. There is a land tax, but it is only 0.03%, and it is calculated on a price the government sets rather than what the property is actually worth. A typical owner pays under $1 million dong a year, about 40 US dollars. And if you sell, the tax is 2% of the sale price, not 2% of the profit. So if the value triples while you own it, the state takes nothing extra from that. So let's put the two side by side. 8% on your money that's mostly uninsured, or a thing that costs you $40 a year, cannot evaporate, and your children will inherit. So why are Vietnamese homes so expensive compared to what people over here actually earn and what they can actually be rented for? Because rent is paying for a 1 month use of a building, while the purchase price is paying for a slice of a scarce street, a potential business, a family home, an inheritance, and a safe. None of that shows up in the rental yield, which is also the quickest way to understand why so many people say that Vietnamese property is such a bad investment. What they almost always mean when they say that is that they're talking about apartments. And an apartment is the exact same thing, but with everything valuable except for a place to live taken out. So the market is not irrational. We have just been measuring it by the wrong idea of what is actually being sold, though the cost of all of it does land disproportionately on a single group, which is the younger generation. If your parents already own land, then you are probably fine. You inherit your way into a club. If they do not, you will likely be renting for the rest of your life, which, to be fair, is the same story in about half of the world right now. Vietnam is no different here. And the one thing holding the whole arrangement up is now being taken away. There is a property tax law heading for the National Assembly with a review due in October, which would introduce an annual tax on owning property for the first time, with the heaviest rates aimed at people holding second homes and sitting on empty land. The details are not settled, but the direction is not in doubt. The entire thing here basically runs on the fact that keeping property costs you basically nothing. And the government has finally decided that that should no longer be the case. Thank you very much for watching. If you got something out of the video, consider hitting the like button and giving me a thumbs up. It helps me out more than you know. But thank you again so much for watching, and as always, take care.